College Algebra. This is Chapter 5, Section 4, and I forgot to put Chapter 5 up here. So here it is. It is Chapter 5, Section 4. Okay, this is using everything that we learned in Section 3 to graph a rational function. So when we graph a rational function, first of all, we want to check the denominator and the numerator and see if we can factor it. In this particular example, and incidentally, this is example 1 in section 4, you can't factor the top, but you can factor the bottom. The bottom is difference of squares, so it factors in x minus 2, x plus 2. Remember, your vertical asymptotes are what makes the denominator 0. So we can see that by this right here, that x can't be 2, can't be negative 2. So x equaling 2 and x equaling negative 2 are vertical asymptotes. Over the graph, that's the reason I drew these red dashed lines at negative 2 and 2. Then we do our 3 rules for the horizontal asymptotes. This happens to be rule 1. The exponential power, the leading exponential power on the bottom is bigger than the top, because that's a 1. So whenever the bottom exponential power, leading exponential power is bigger than the top, it is always y equals 0. That's a horizontal asymptote. That's the reason I drew that horizontal asymptote right here, coming across. So when you look at the red lines, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sections. Now, as far as these side sections go, the graph can either be at the top or the bottom, but not both. Same thing here, okay? So what happens is we try to find points. So we find our y-intercept just by plugging 0 into the equation. We find out 0, 1/4. So I plotted the point 0, 1/4 here. Then we find x-intercepts. Well, x-intercepts only deal with the numerator. So anytime we can look at the numerator to see when it equals 0, especially if it's a factor, that becomes an x-intercept. And so what happens here is when I plug 0 into the equation, I end up getting 0. And so, or I'm sorry, I ended up getting 1, 0. And so that's the reason I plotted this point here. So now I have 2 points on the graph. Well, that's about the only 2 points I can get. So what I do is, because I have an isotope at negative 2, I'm going to use negative 3. I plug negative 3 into the equation, do the math, and I get negative 4/5, which means negative 4/5 is here. So this part of the graph is right here. And it can't cross past the red dashes. And remember, you're just drawing a sketch. If the point had been ended up here, I would have drawn the graph up here. But because it was negative, it's down here. Then over here, I use 3. And so when I use 3 and do the math, I get 2/5, which puts it into positive. So that's the reason I drew the graph right here. Then what I do is I use negative 1 because I've got a good idea that this graph is going to go down this way. So what I figure out is if the graph is going to do this or if the graph is going to do what I'm seeing here. So I use negative 1, plug negative 1 in there, and I get 2/3, which puts it in a positive direction. So now I know my graph does this in the middle. If you want to see it, the diagram in the book is much better. Here's the diagram in the book. They're using a few more points. Basically, they're doing the same thing that I did in terms of this. They're coming up with the same graph. This is on page 366 of your textbook.